I'm Victoria Hayes, and at 39 years old, I finally understand that sometimes the greatest victories taste sweeter when they're served cold. My story begins with rejection and ends with redemption, though the path between those 2 points twisted through 15 years of silence, struggle, and ultimately transformation that nobody saw coming. If you're listening to this, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and make sure to hit subscribe, because what I'm about to share proves that family expectations don't have to define your destiny. Picture this: a dinner table where every conversation revolves around medical journals, patient consultations, and the weight of legacy. That was my childhood, every single night. The Hayes family didn't just practice medicine, we embodied it, breathed it, lived it like a religion passed down through bloodlines. My grandfather founded Hayes Medical Center back when the neighborhood was just farmland. My father, Dr. Alexander Hayes, transformed that small clinic into the most sought-after cardiology practice in 3 counties. My mother, Dr. Catherine Hayes, built her orthopedic surgery reputation, one successful procedure at a time, until her waiting list stretched beyond 6 months. They weren't just doctors. They were institutions, legends whispered about in medical school hallways and hospital break rooms. Growing up, Hayes meant understanding from your first conscious memory that your future had already been written, bound, and filed away in the family archives. My bedroom wasn't decorated with typical childhood whimsy. Instead, anatomical posters covered my walls like wallpaper, skeletal systems, and muscular diagrams where other kids had superheroes and pop stars. Birthday presents came wrapped in medical themes, anatomy coloring books, toy surgical kits, miniature stethoscopes that actually worked. Every gift carried an unspoken message: this is who you are, this is who you'll become. My father's favorite phrase, repeated so often it became background noise, was that medicine flows through Hayes veins, like plasma, through capillaries. The metaphor was always medical, always clinical, always reinforcing the inevitable path I was expected to walk. Dinner conversations at our house resembled rounds at a teaching hospital more than family meals. Dad would present his latest complex case, describing arterial blockages and valve replacements while passing the potatoes. Mom would counter with her surgical innovations, explaining joint reconstruction techniques between bites of salad. I'd sit there, desperately trying to contribute something valuable, memorizing medical terminology and studying disease processes just to earn a nod of approval. But somehow, my contributions always fell slightly short, never quite measuring up to the standard they'd set. My older brother Marcus, though, he was everything they hoped for, the golden child who fulfilled every expectation effortlessly. 5 years my senior, Marcus displayed natural talent for clinical diagnosis and patient rapport from his earliest volunteer work at Dad's practice. They welcomed him into their professional world with open arms, already planning his partnership before he'd even taken his MCATs. Mom would smile at Marcus during those dinners and say things like, "Marcus understands what it means to carry the Hayes torch forward," and the implication hung heavy in the air that somehow, despite my best efforts, I didn't quite grasp that same responsibility. Hayes Medical Center occupied an entire renovated historic building downtown, all exposed brick and modern glass, a perfect blend of tradition and progress. The practice represented everything our family valued: prestige, excellence, continuity. Wealthy patients filled the appointment calendar months in advance, willing to wait for the privilege of Hayes family care. I started working the front desk at 15 during summer vacations, answering phones and filing charts, thinking maybe if I showed dedication, if I proved my commitment, they'd see I belonged in their world too. Despite the crushing expectations, and constant, unfavorable comparisons to Marcus. I genuinely loved the medical field. What fascinated me, though, wasn't exactly what captivated my parents. They focused exclusively on individual patients, one body at a time, treating diseases and symptoms with laser precision. I found myself drawn to something bigger, more systemic, the infrastructure that made their clinical work possible. How did hospitals decide which equipment to purchase? How were resources allocated across departments? What systems ensured patient safety while managing costs? These questions consumed me, but I kept them private, knowing they'd be dismissed as distractions from real medicine. During my final year of high school, our career exploration program placed me with the hospital administrator for a week-long shadow experience. That week changed everything, opened my eyes to an entirely different dimension of healthcare. The administrator's office was command central for hundreds of decisions affecting thousands of lives daily. Staffing ratios, budget allocations, quality metrics, regulatory compliance, all the invisible machinery that allowed physicians like my parents to practice their craft. This was where healthcare policy met real-world implementation, where business acumen intersected with clinical outcomes. I could make my mark here, I realized, create something distinct, yet complementary to the Hayes family legacy. But I carefully guarded this revelation, already knowing how it would be received at home. I applied to the pre-med programs my parents selected, got accepted to Dad's prestigious alma mater, and prepared to follow the predetermined path, even as doubts grew louder in my mind every day. The seed of a different future had taken root, and eventually it would crack through the concrete of family expectation. Consequences be damned. The collision between my truth and their expectations came during winter break of my junior year at university. After 2.5 years, drowning in biochemistry equations, dissecting cadavers in anatomy lab, and cramming for organic chemistry exams that left me drained and empty, I couldn't maintain the charade any longer. The disconnect between my parents' vision and my own authentic interests had grown too wide to bridge with more silence. I chose a Sunday dinner to make my announcement, perhaps subconsciously hoping the formal setting would keep their reactions measured. I'd rehearsed my speech for weeks, carefully crafting explanations that would help them understand. Over roasted chicken and asparagus, I took a deep breath and declared that I wanted to switch my academic focus from clinical medicine to healthcare administration and policy. The words hung in the air like smoke from a chemical explosion, toxic and spreading. Complete silence followed, the kind of heavy quiet that makes your ears ring and your heart pound against your ribs. Dad slowly set his wine glass down with excruciating deliberateness, his face transitioning from confusion to anger, like a storm rolling in. Mom stared at me as though I'd announced plans to abandon civilization and join a cult in the wilderness. "That's not medicine," Dad finally said, his voice carrying that dangerous calm that preceded explosions. "That's bureaucracy, paperwork, politics. Hayes family members heal people with their hands and minds, not by shuffling forms in some administrative office." I tried explaining how healthcare administration shapes the entire system that enables clinical work, how good management improves outcomes across entire populations. But he cut me off mid-sentence. "Enough," he said, his palm hitting the table hard enough to rattle silverware. "This is about you choosing the easy path because medical school is too challenging. You're looking for an escape route, and I won't enable it." Mom's disappointment somehow cut deeper than Dad's anger. Her voice trembled as she spoke about all their investments, the connections they'd cultivated, the doors they'd opened, all about to be thrown away so I could become what she called some glorified office manager. The argument spiraled from there, voices rising, old resentments surfacing, painful truths expressed that couldn't be unsaid. By the time dessert would have been served, Dad had delivered his ultimatum: pursue medicine or pursue it alone. Without their financial backing, Mom, tears streaming down her face, accused me of betraying not just them, but 3 generations of Hayes physicians who built our family reputation through sacrifice and dedication. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by all those medical posters and textbooks that now felt like prison walls closing in, feeling more isolated than I'd ever felt before. But beneath the hurt and fear, something else stirred: determination, resolve, certainty that I was right, even if it cost me everything. I returned to campus the next morning, skipping the remaining days of break. My decision solidified, even as my heart broke from the price I'd have to pay. True to their word, my parents immediately stopped all financial support. Tuition payments ceased. My monthly living allowance vanished. Even my car insurance was canceled. At 20 years old, I suddenly faced financial crisis, frantically applying for emergency student loans, picking up 3 different campus jobs, transforming my previously comfortable college experience into a desperate scramble for survival. Communication with my family withered to almost nothing. Holiday visits became excruciating exercises in avoiding any mention of my education or future plans. Marcus, now in his residency, tried playing mediator initially, but ultimately aligned with our parents' perspective. "They just want what's best for you, Vic," he'd say during brief phone calls. "Maybe you're being stubborn. It's not too late to change course and make this right." But I stayed committed to my choice, channeling hurt into fuel for success. I formally changed my major to healthcare management, added a business concentration, and attacked my coursework with ferocious intensity, born from equal parts passion and defiance. My grades, which had always been solid, became exceptional as I discovered genuine excitement for subjects that had never existed in organic chemistry or cellular biology. During my senior year, Dr. Patricia Montgomery visited campus as a guest lecturer for our Healthcare Innovation Series. Dr. Montgomery represented everything I aspired to become: a physician who'd transitioned into healthcare leadership and now served as CEO of a major regional hospital system. After I contributed passionately to a discussion about emergency department redesign, she asked me to stay behind after class. "You have something special," she said, studying me with sharp, evaluating eyes. "You understand clinical realities, but also systems thinking. That combination is rare and incredibly valuable in healthcare leadership." When I hesitantly shared my family situation, expecting judgment or dismissal, I instead found empathy and encouragement. Dr. Montgomery became my mentor, eventually helping me secure a competitive internship at a large teaching hospital for my final semester. That internship transformed my understanding of what was possible. For the first time, I worked in an environment where my ideas about healthcare delivery were welcomed rather than ridiculed. I partnered with administrators who recognized potential in my background. My capstone project, a redesigned patient intake workflow, reduced registration errors by 31% in a pilot test. As graduation approached, with no family members planning to attend the ceremony, I reached another fork in the road. This time, though, instead of doubt clouding my vision, I felt growing confidence that my chosen path was right, regardless of who stood beside me, walking it. With Dr. Montgomery's strong recommendation, I gained acceptance to a prestigious dual-degree program, combining healthcare administration with an MBA. I worked as a teaching assistant to cover some costs, took out more substantial loans, and invested in my future, despite the mounting debt. Each semester, I sent achievement updates home, hoping for acknowledgement, but received only terse, formal responses, if anything at all. I graduated top of my class, with both degrees, and fielded multiple job offers. Following Dr. Montgomery's advice, I accepted a position at Riverside Medical Center, a major academic hospital in a city about 4 hours from my hometown, joining their executive fellowship program designed to develop future healthcare leaders through rotational assignments across all hospital departments and management functions. I approached each rotation with the work ethic my parents had instilled, combined with the innovative thinking they'd tried to suppress. My fellowship culminated in a project redesigning outpatient scheduling that decreased no-show rates by 28%, while increasing clinic revenue by over $3 million in year one. You possess a gift for seeing both macro and micro simultaneously, the chief operating officer told me during my final evaluation. You grasp clinical implications of administrative choices, which makes you extraordinarily effective. When the fellowship concluded, I received an offer for a permanent role as Director of Ambulatory Services, an unusually senior position for someone my age, and I accepted without hesitation. The following 6 years passed in a blur of 70-hour work weeks, challenging initiatives, and steadily expanding responsibilities. I faced resistance from some older physicians who resented taking direction from a young administrator, especially a woman. But I won their respect, one project at a time, through data-driven results and genuine appreciation for their clinical expertise. By age 31, I'd been promoted to Associate Chief Operating Officer, overseeing multiple service lines. By 34, I became Riverside Medical Center's youngest COO in the institution's 90-year history. My leadership approach balanced strict fiscal discipline with unwavering commitment to care quality and staff satisfaction, a combination that earned both respect and measurable outcomes. Throughout this period, family contact remained minimal and superficial. They knew I worked in healthcare administration somewhere, but seemed deliberately incurious about specifics of my career trajectory. During infrequent holiday visits, when asked about work, I gave vague responses about my position at Riverside, allowing them to assume I held a middle management role, rather than correcting their underestimation. My personal life remained intensely focused on career advancement. The few romantic relationships I attempted typically collapsed under the weight of my schedule and emotional walls I'd built. My closest friend became Daniel Park, Riverside's chief legal counsel, who understood the demands of hospital leadership and offered both professional partnership and genuine friendship. With Daniel's legal expertise, I led development of the hospital's community benefit programs, establishing free clinics in underserved areas and creating partnerships with schools for health education. These initiatives not only fulfilled regulatory obligations, but brought personal fulfillment, allowing me to connect healthcare delivery with social justice in ways my parents' practice never considered. At 37, when Riverside's CEO announced retirement, my executive team encouraged me to apply for the position. The selection process was grueling. Presentations to the board of directors, skeptical questions about my age and experience, but my track record of financial and quality improvements, combined with my strategic vision, ultimately prevailed. The day I received the formal offer to become Riverside Medical Center's Chief Executive Officer and Chief Medical Officer, I felt pride unlike anything I'd experienced professionally. I called Daniel first, then Dr. Montgomery, who'd remained a mentor throughout my journey. I always knew you'd achieve great things, but even I'm impressed by how quickly you got here, Dr. Montgomery said warmly. Have you shared this with your family yet? I hadn't, and despite my professional success, or perhaps because of it, the chasm between my parents and me had only widened over the years. Marcus had joined the family practice as expected and was being groomed for eventual leadership. Our interactions consisted of perfunctory holiday calls and obligatory birthday cards. "They still think I made the wrong choice," I told Dr. Montgomery. "Telling them I'm running a hospital would feel like I'm trying to prove something, and I'm past needing their validation. So I kept my achievement private, assuming leadership of Riverside Medical Center at 38, with a workforce of 3,000 employees and an annual budget exceeding $700 million. My first year as CEO brought challenges and victories, including implementing a complex new electronic health record system and earning a prestigious National Quality Recognition Award. During a strategic planning retreat with my executive leadership team, the trajectory of my career would unexpectedly collide with my family history, setting in motion a confrontation I'd never anticipated or sought. As part of Riverside's 5-year expansion strategy, I'd initiated an aggressive growth plan that included acquiring independent physician practices throughout our service area. Our objective was building an integrated healthcare network, providing coordinated care across the full continuum while achieving operational efficiencies through scale. Sarah Chen, my brilliant Chief Strategy Officer, presented a list of potential acquisition candidates during our quarterly planning session. "We've identified 18 independent medical groups that fit our growth parameters," she explained, as we reviewed analytics together. "Most are primary care practices seeking the stability and resources of hospital affiliation as payment models shift toward value-based care." I nearly spit out my coffee when I spotted Hayes Medical Center listed among the acquisition targets. My parents' practice, the medical dynasty that had deemed me unworthy of joining their legacy, was apparently now seeking to be purchased by a hospital system. "What's the financial picture on this one?" I asked Sarah, working hard to keep my voice neutral as I pointed to my family's name on the spreadsheet. "Actually, it's one of the more intriguing situations," she replied, pulling up detailed financial analytics. Hayes Medical Center has outstanding reputation and loyal patient base, but their financial management has been problematic. Overhead is excessive, billing practices are outdated, they've made questionable capital investments, they're asset-rich, but operationally inefficient, and their market position has eroded steadily over the past 4 years as younger patients migrate to more modern practices. The irony was almost poetic. The exact skills my parents had dismissed, the business and administrative capabilities they considered beneath Hayes' family dignity, were precisely what their practice desperately needed to survive. I excused myself from the meeting and retreated to my office, needing space to process this unexpected development. My initial impulse was to recuse myself completely from any decisions regarding Hayes Medical Center, to disclose my conflict of interest and step away entirely. But another part of me, the rejected daughter who'd been cut off and dismissed, wanted to be involved directly. After extensive reflection and detailed consultation with Daniel about legal and ethical implications, I chose a middle approach. I wouldn't disclose my relationship immediately, but I'd ensure the acquisition decision was based purely on business merit, with additional board oversight to eliminate even perception of personal bias. The due diligence process uncovered even more significant problems at my parents' practice than initially visible. Their stubborn refusal to implement modern electronic health records created inefficiencies cascading through every workflow. Their compensation structure heavily favored senior physicians, my parents, at the expense of younger associates who were departing at concerning rates. Their patient satisfaction scores, once the highest regionally, had declined markedly as they failed adapting to evolving patient expectations. In a moment of painful clarity, I recognized that the practice held up throughout my childhood as the pinnacle of medical excellence had become a cautionary tale about what happens when prestige trumps progress. The Hayes way of practicing medicine, which I'd been told represented the only correct approach, was proving unsustainable in a transforming healthcare landscape. The acquisition committee ultimately recommended proceeding with an offer for Hayes Medical Center, citing strong brand recognition, valuable location, and significant potential for rapid improvement under proper management. When the recommendation reached my desk for final CEO approval, I signed off without allowing myself to dwell on personal implications. The integration phase would typically involve our operations team handling negotiations and transition planning, but I made an unusual request in this case. I want to personally lead the Hayes Medical Center integration, I told Sarah during our next private meeting. She looked surprised, questioning why the CEO would handle work several levels below her position when we had entire teams for practice acquisitions. This one is unique, I said carefully. It has distinctive culture and community reputation. I want to ensure we preserve strengths while addressing operational weaknesses. What I didn't articulate was that I needed to be the person facing my parents across the negotiation table. After 15 years of estrangement and underestimation, I would finally reveal what I'd built while they were dismissing my choices. It would be difficult and emotionally complex, but necessary for both professional and personal closure. As the acquisition process advanced and a meeting was scheduled with Hayes Medical Center leadership, I experienced a strange mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The executive conference room on Riverside's top floor would soon host a family reunion unlike any before, and a reckoning 15 years in the making. The morning of the Hayes Medical Center meeting, I stood before my office mirror, adjusting my jacket and reapplying lipstick. At 39, I bore little resemblance to the uncertain college student who'd last challenged her parents. My wardrobe of tailored designer suits had replaced the discount clothes from my financially struggling years. The confidence earned from leading a major hospital had replaced my former desperate need for parental validation. "They won't recognize you," Daniel said, when he stopped by to wish me luck. "Not just your appearance, but who you've become fundamentally." I'd instructed our administrative staff not to reveal my identity or position to the Hayes representatives before the meeting. Preliminary discussions had been conducted by Sarah and our integration team, with me referenced only as senior hospital leadership, who would attend the final negotiation. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Daniel asked. "I could still substitute for you and handle it." I shook my head firmly. This was something I needed to do myself. Face whatever emotions arose. Own this moment completely. As I gathered materials and walked toward the executive conference room, I felt unexpectedly calm despite the personal stakes. Years of leading difficult negotiations and high-pressure meetings had prepared me for this moment, even though none had been quite so personally charged. The Hayes contingent was already seated when I entered, my parents positioned at the table's head, with Marcus beside them, plus 2 younger physicians I didn't recognize, presumably recent partners. For several seconds, nobody looked up from reviewing documents, giving me opportunity to observe them unnoticed. Dad had aged dramatically, his formerly dark hair now completely white, deep furrows carved around his mouth and eyes. Mom looked more physically preserved, but tense, her posture rigid as she studied paperwork through reading glasses. Marcus, now 44, had grown to resemble Dad remarkably, down to his expression of barely contained impatience. "Good morning," I said as I closed the conference room door behind me. "Thank you all for making the time today." 5 heads turned toward me simultaneously. I watched confusion register first, then shock spreading across my parents' faces. Marcus's jaw literally dropped open. The 2 younger physicians, oblivious to the family drama unfolding before them, simply looked politely attentive. "Victoria," my mother finally managed, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Hayes," I corrected professionally, setting my portfolio on the table. "Chief Executive Officer and Chief Medical Officer of Riverside Medical Center." It's been quite a while. Dad recovered first, his expression shifting from shock to immediate skepticism, bordering on hostility. "What is this? Some kind of joke? Where's the hospital administrator we're supposed to be meeting?" "You're looking at her," I replied, calmly, taking my seat at the table's opposite end. "I've been with Riverside for 15 years, the most recent 2 as CEO. But we're not here to discuss my career path. We're here to address the potential acquisition of Hayes Medical Center by our hospital network." The younger physicians glanced between us, clearly sensing tension, without understanding its source. Marcus looked like he wished the floor would swallow him. "This is absurd," Dad blustered, starting to rise from his seat. "We came for a serious business discussion, not some family ambush or power play." "Dr. Hayes," I said firmly, using his professional title rather than calling him Dad, "this is absolutely a serious business discussion. Your practice approached our hospital regarding acquisition, and as CEO, all such transactions require my final approval. Shall we proceed professionally, or would you prefer to reschedule when you're feeling more composed?" The power dynamics had shifted palpably in the room. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the supplicant in our relationship. Dad slowly sank back into his chair, visibly struggling to reconcile his daughter with the executive controlling his practice's future. We proceeded through preliminary discussions with forced professionalism, reviewing valuation analyses and integration schedules prepared by our teams. I maintained detached, business-like composure while presenting our assessment of Hayes Medical Center's strengths and significant weaknesses. "As these projections demonstrate," I explained, pointing to graphs displayed on the screen, "your practice has experienced 32% decline in new patient acquisition over 5 years, while operating costs increased 41%. Your revenue cycle performance is nearly double industry benchmarks, and your technology implementation significantly lags current standards." Mom flinched at each point, while Dad grew progressively more defensive, his face reddening. "Our practice has delivered exceptional care for over 3 decades, he interjected sharply. "These business metrics don't capture the quality of medicine we practice." "On the contrary," I countered smoothly, "patient satisfaction data tells us quite a bit about care quality, and yours has declined for 8 consecutive quarters." I slid a report across the polished table. "What this data reveals is that Hayes Medical Center remains a respected brand with strong potential, but requires substantial operational modernization to remain viable." After 3 hours of detailed discussion, we reached the negotiation's critical point: financial terms of the acquisition. Based on comprehensive analysis, I concluded, Riverside Medical Center is prepared to offer the following purchase terms. I outlined a fair but not generous offer, reflecting the practice's true value rather than its inflated self-perception. Silence filled the room as my parents and the other physicians reviewed the numbers. Marcus spoke first, cautiously saying it seemed reasonable based on current market conditions, earning a sharp glare from Dad. "It's insulting," Dad countered. "You're drastically undervaluing decades of reputation and patient relationships." I remained expressionless. The offer reflects actual financial performance, not historical reputation. However, we do value the Hayes brand, which is why we're offering to retain the name and current physician leadership during a transitional period. Dad scoffed dismissively. "A transitional period? So you can eventually force us out of our own practice?" "That's standard in acquisitions of this nature," I explained patiently. "But I'm open to discussing alternatives if you have a counterproposal. A thought seemed to occur to Dad then, his expression shifting from anger to calculation, like a gambler spotting an angle. Actually, we do have an alternative worth considering. Perhaps instead of outright acquisition, your hospital might consider bringing on a partner who could help modernize operations while maintaining our independence. I raised an eyebrow, immediately seeing where this was heading. And who would you suggest for such a role? Dad gestured toward me with affected casualness. Well, you seem to have developed certain administrative capabilities. Perhaps you'd consider buying into the practice. Say a 25% share initially. You could apply whatever corporate methodologies you've learned while we maintain clinical authority. The sheer audacity took my breath away. After 15 years of estrangement, after dismissing my career and cutting off all support, he was now attempting to leverage our family connection for a better deal, avoiding full acquisition. Are you offering me a position in the family practice, Dr. Hayes? I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. Dad shrugged, with false casualness. It seems a natural solution. You finally join the Hayes medical legacy, and we gain your administrative expertise. The slight pause before administrative conveyed all his lingering contempt for my chosen path. I see. And what would such a partnership buy-in cost? He named a figure so absurdly inflated, it would have been laughable in any context. But in this situation, it was deeply revealing. He still didn't believe I could afford it. He still saw me as the struggling student he'd abandoned financially, not as the successful executive I'd become. That's an interesting proposal, I said, allowing a deliberate pause. Unfortunately, I think you fundamentally misunderstand both my position and my resources. Dad waved dismissively. I realize the buy-in might exceed your current means, but perhaps the hospital could fund it as part of your compensation arrangement. The condescension in his tone was the final straw. 15 years of dismissal, underestimation, and emotional distance crystallized into a single moment of perfect clarity. I opened my laptop and pulled up a document I'd prepared for precisely this possibility. Actually, Dr. Hayes, I said with complete calm, I believe you're operating under several fundamental misconceptions. First, as Chief Medical Officer of this hospital, I already possess full clinical privileges that far exceed anything your practice could offer me. Second, as Chief Executive Officer, I don't need to buy into your practice. I rotated the laptop to face him. Riverside Medical Center already owns it. I pushed the document toward him, a copy of the preliminary acquisition agreement his practice administrator had signed the previous week. This isn't a negotiation about whether Riverside will acquire Hayes Medical Center. That decision has already been made by your board. This meeting is simply to discuss transition details and leadership structure moving forward. The blood drained from Dad's face as he stared at the document, reality of the situation finally penetrating his assumptions. Mom gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat. Marcus looked between us with wide eyes, witnessing the complete reversal of power dynamics that had defined our family for decades. As of next month, I continued into the stunned silence, Hayes Medical Center will become a wholly owned subsidiary of Riverside Medical Center, and as CEO, I'll have final authority over all operational decisions, including staffing, compensation, and clinical privileges. I closed my laptop with a decisive click that echoed in the silent conference room. Now, shall we discuss how you'd like to proceed with the transition, or do you need time to process this information? The aftermath of that revelation was predictably dramatic. Dad stormed from the conference room without another word, Mom following closely behind, after throwing me a look mixing shock with something that might have been grudging respect. Marcus lingered awkwardly, introducing me to the two younger physicians, who were still processing the family drama they'd just witnessed. Perhaps we should reconvene tomorrow, I suggested to them professionally. This has been a lot for everyone to absorb. After they departed, Marcus remained, studying me with entirely new eyes. So this is what you've been building all these years, he said, gesturing to the hospital around us. We all thought you were just managing some office somewhere, pushing papers like Dad said. I built a career, I replied simply, just not the one they wanted for me. Are you doing this for revenge? He asked directly. Acquiring their practice to prove a point? The question gave me pause. Was there vindication in my decision to personally handle this acquisition? Absolutely. But revenge? The acquisition makes sound business sense, I told him honestly. The practice has value, and with proper management, it can thrive again. If I were motivated by revenge, I'd have let it continue declining until it collapsed under its own mismanagement. Marcus nodded slowly, seeming to accept this explanation. They won't see it that way, you know. I know, I acknowledged, but that's been our family pattern, hasn't it? They see what they expect to see, not what's actually there. We parted with an awkward half-embrace, Marcus promising to talk with our parents and encourage them to approach the situation professionally, even if they couldn't manage it warmly. The following morning, my assistant announced that my parents were in the lobby requesting to meet with me. I had them shown to a smaller, more private conference room rather than my office. Wanting to maintain professional boundaries, even now, they entered, looking exhausted but composed, as though they'd spent the entire night processing this new reality. Dad spoke first, predictably. We've come to discuss terms, he said stiffly, since it appears we have no choice regarding this acquisition. There are always choices, I replied evenly. But yes, the acquisition will proceed. The question is whether you want to participate in the new structure or prefer to retire. Mom flinched visibly at the word retire, but Dad leaned forward intently. And if we stay, will you use your position to punish us for the past? The question echoed Marcus from the day before, but carried the weight of 15 years of estrangement between us. I took a moment before answering, wanting my words to be precise and truthful. What happened between us was personal, I said carefully. This is business. The changes I'll implement at the practice are identical to what I do regardless of ownership history. Electronic health records will be fully implemented. Billing will be centralized through hospital systems. Physician compensation will be restructured to reward quality outcomes rather than volume. If you're asking whether I'll abuse my position to retaliate, the answer is no. That would be unprofessional and ultimately counterproductive. But I also won't protect outdated practices out of sentimentality or family loyalty. Mom spoke for the first time since sitting down. You've changed so much, Victoria. You've become so hard, so cold. I've become effective, I corrected her gently. I've built something substantial here, something that serves thousands of patients daily. And I did it without support or belief from the people who should have been my strongest advocates. The hurt in my voice must have been evident, despite my efforts at professionalism, because something in Mom's expression softened noticeably. Perhaps, she said quietly, we were wrong about certain things. Dad looked like he might argue, but then, surprisingly, nodded slowly. Marcus showed us articles about you last night, awards you've received, programs you've developed here. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. They were quite impressive. It was the closest thing to an apology or admission of error I'd ever received from him. And despite everything I felt, a small knot of tension released in my chest. Thank you, I said simply. We spent the next 3 hours discussing practical aspects of the transition. They raised concerns about long-term patients, their staff, their approach to medicine. I listened carefully and addressed each point professionally, outlining a transition plan, preserving strengths while updating weaknesses. By our meeting's end, we'd reached a functional working arrangement. They would remain with the practice for 3 years, assisting with transition while gradually reducing patient loads. As they approached retirement, Marcus would stay as a senior physician, but also develop administrative skills to potentially assume a leadership role within Riverside's primary care division. Before leaving, Mom hesitated at the door, then asked, "Would you consider joining us for dinner sometime? Not to discuss business, just as family." The question caught me completely off guard. 15 years of distance couldn't be bridged by one difficult meeting and a tentative professional agreement. "I'm not ready for that," I admitted, honestly. "Maybe eventually, but not yet." She nodded, accepting my boundary with surprising grace. Dad looked like he wanted to say something more, but ultimately just extended his hand for a formal handshake, which I returned with equal formality. The following weeks became a whirlwind of transition planning. I assigned a dedicated integration team to Hayes Medical Center, but remained personally involved, reviewing all major decisions carefully. I also made a point of meeting individually with every staff member, from the newest receptionist to the most senior nurse practitioner. Many were shocked, learning I was the Hayes daughter they'd heard mentioned, but never met. The family disappointment who'd supposedly abandoned medicine for business. "I never abandoned medicine," I told one longtime nurse who'd known me as a teenager. "I just chose to serve it differently than expected." One particularly meaningful interaction came with Dr. Jennifer Liu, a young physician who'd joined the practice 3 years earlier and grown increasingly frustrated with its resistance to change. "I was planning to leave," she confessed during our meeting. "The senior physicians, your parents, they resist every suggestion for improvement. They keep insisting the Hayes way is the only correct way." I smiled at the familiar phrase that had haunted my entire childhood. "Well, there's about to be a new Hayes way," I told her, "and I'd like you to help define it." Over the following months, the practice underwent its transformation. New systems were implemented, workflows redesigned, physical space renovated to create more efficient, patient-centered environments. I visited weekly, sometimes working directly alongside staff to understand their challenges and perspectives firsthand. My relationship with my parents remained professional, but gradually thawed around the edges, like ice melting in early spring. Dad, to my surprise, became more receptive to changes once he witnessed patient satisfaction scores improving dramatically. Mom developed particular interest in our community outreach programs, eventually volunteering to lead a women's health initiative for underserved populations she'd never previously engaged with. Marcus and I cautiously rebuilt our sibling relationship, discovering we had more in common as adults than we'd ever had as children. He began appreciating my administrative skills, while I developed new respect for his clinical expertise. And we found ourselves collaborating effectively, combining different perspectives to improve patient care. The most challenging aspect remained navigating personal undercurrents beneath our professional interactions. Years of hurt, resentment, and misunderstanding couldn't be erased by business success alone. Moments of tension still arose, old patterns emerging in stressful situations, occasional verbal missteps, reopening old wounds. But there were also moments of genuine connection and mutual respect that would have been unimaginable a year earlier, like when Dad asked my opinion on a complex operational challenge, genuinely valuing my expertise for the first time I could remember, or when Mom proudly introduced me to one of her longtime patients as my daughter, the hospital CEO, with unmistakable pride in her voice. Small steps, tentative rebuilding, not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a pathway toward something new that honored both our shared history and our separate journeys. One year After that momentous board meeting, Hayes Medical Center hosted an open house celebrating its renovation and expansion under Riverside ownership. The practice had been transformed, not just physically, but culturally, with modern systems, expanded services, and renewed focus on both patient experience and staff well-being that represented everything I'd envisioned. I stood at the back of the crowded reception area, watching as Dad addressed the gathering of staff, patients, and community members. He looked different somehow. The rigid authoritarianism that had defined him throughout my childhood softened into something more reflective, more humble. For over 30 years, he was saying, I believe there was only one correct way to practice medicine, the Hayes way, as I understood it. What I failed to recognize was that the Hayes way could evolve, could expand beyond my limited vision. He paused, scanning the room until his eyes found mine. Sometimes it takes a new generation to reveal the blind spots in our perspective, to show us possibilities we couldn't see for ourselves. It was as close to public acknowledgement of my contribution as he'd ever made, and I felt unexpected emotion tightening my throat. After the speeches concluded, as guests mingled and toured the renovated facility, Mom approached me with 2 glasses of champagne. Your father may never articulate it directly, she said, handing me 1 glass. But he's proud of what you've accomplished here. We both are, truly. Even though I never became a practicing physician like you wanted, I couldn't help asking. She smiled with genuine warmth I hadn't seen in years. You became exactly what the Hayes legacy needed, Victoria. We were just too stubborn and blind to recognize it at the time. Later that evening, I found myself alone in what had once been Dad's private office, now transformed into a collaborative workspace for the physician team. Marcus found me there, leaning against the doorframe with a knowing expression. Quite a journey from being told you couldn't afford to buy into the practice to owning the entire thing, he observed with a slight smile. I laughed softly, the irony not lost on me. That was never really the point, though, wasn't it? He challenged gently. At least a little bit. I considered the question with complete honesty. Maybe initially, I admitted. That moment in the boardroom, seeing Dad's face when he realized I was in control, there was definitely some satisfaction there. But that feeling faded quickly, replaced by something more meaningful. What replaced it? Marcus asked, with genuine curiosity. Understanding that true success isn't about proving others wrong, I said thoughtfully. It's about creating something meaningful, despite obstacles placed in your path. Every time I focused on showing them they were wrong about me, I gave away my power to their opinions. Real freedom came when I built something I believed in, regardless of their approval or recognition. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, processing this. I've been thinking about how different our paths were. I followed the blueprint they created, without ever questioning it. You forged your own way against tremendous resistance. I wonder sometimes which of us demonstrated more courage. Different kinds of courage, I suggested, and different kinds of challenges to overcome. Neither path was easy, just different. In the months that followed, my relationship with my parents continued its careful evolution. We weren't the warm, demonstrative family you see in movies. Probably never would be, but we'd found a new equilibrium based on professional respect that was slowly, cautiously extending into more personal interactions. Dad began consulting me on business decisions beyond the practice. Mom and I started meeting monthly for lunch, carefully rebuilding a relationship fractured for so many years. Marcus and I became genuine collaborators, his clinical expertise complementing my administrative vision as we developed innovative care delivery models together. Perhaps the most meaningful evidence of transformation came when a young administrative intern at the hospital approached me after a leadership development seminar I'd conducted. Dr. Hayes, she said hesitantly, Your father was my grandmother's cardiologist for years. He told me I should speak with you about my interest in healthcare administration. He said you were the best possible mentor I could have in this field. The recommendation, so contrary to the father, who'd once dismissed my career choice as beneath family dignity, was evidence of profound transformation, not just in him, but in our entire family dynamic, in understanding of what constitutes valuable contributions to medicine. The journey from rejection to recognition had been long and frequently painful. There were no shortcuts, no magical moment of complete reconciliation, just steady work, professional achievement, and slow rebuilding of trust and respect on both sides. What I learned through this process was that authentic healing doesn't require forgetting the past or pretending hurt never happened. It requires building something new that acknowledges both pain and growth that emerged from it. It requires establishing boundaries while remaining open to evolution. Most importantly, it requires defining your own measure of success, rather than accepting someone else's predetermined definition of achievement. The deepest irony of my story is that by rejecting me in my chosen path, my parents inadvertently set me on the trajectory to becoming exactly what our family legacy needed to survive in a rapidly changing healthcare landscape. Had they embraced and supported my vision from the beginning, Hayes Medical Center might have evolved gradually, adapting to new realities without crisis. Instead, their resistance forced me to build strength and skills entirely outside their sphere of influence, returning only when I had power to implement necessary changes on my own terms and timeline. Today, I balance my role as hospital CEO with ongoing involvement in the practice bearing my family name. We've dramatically expanded community outreach programs, providing care to populations my parents' practice never served or even considered. We've created training opportunities for healthcare administrators alongside clinical education, recognizing that modern medicine requires both skill sets working in collaborative harmony. Most importantly, I've found genuine peace with my journey and choices. The desperate need for parental approval that once drove so many decisions has been replaced by confidence in my own vision and values. I still carry the Hayes name, but I've redefined what it means and represents on my own authentic terms. If you're listening to this and struggling with family expectations that don't align with your authentic path and calling, know that the most difficult road often leads to the most meaningful destination. Your value and worth are not determined by others' recognition or approval of them. Success isn't measured by following someone else's blueprint or predetermined path, but by creating something reflecting your unique gifts, vision, and contribution to the world. Have you ever had to forge your own path against intense family expectations and pressure? Did it eventually lead to mutual understanding and respect? Or are you still navigating that challenging journey? Share your experiences and insights in the comments below. I read every single one, and if this story resonated with you or reminded you of your own journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes family rejection that feels like a devastating ending can actually become the beginning of your greatest personal and professional triumph. Thank you for listening to my story with such attention, and remember always that the most powerful legacy is the one you define and create for yourself, not the one others demand you fulfill for them.